Hey there, everyone. I believe we are live. I'm going to double check on Facebook itself because I know the one time I don't check will be the one time that it doesn't go live properly. And want to make sure that you can all see us. Looks like, yep, there I am, my smiling face. So, welcome to Makin Bacon. I'm Jason Logston, and we are all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. And today's episode is brought to you by Self-Publishing 101, how to publish a printed cookbook on Amazon using KDP. That is my course. I'll put a link in there for you. And the average home cook owns almost 50 times more printed cookbooks than PDF cookbooks. So why are you limiting yourself? With the advent of print-on-demand companies like Amazon, KDP, and Ingram Spark, it's now easier than ever to become your own publisher. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can waste not only your time, but also your money. And that's where my video course comes in, stepping you through the entire self-publishing process. You can check it out at makethatbacon.com/publish now. And remember, you can join us live every Thursday when we record these episodes. If you're listening to this on your podcast, this happened in the past. If you're joining us on Facebook right now, you are live with us. So you can ask the guest questions, you can talk to the other bloggers in the comments, and you can even see our smiling faces. So join us Thursdays at makethatbacon.com/live. Now, on to the show. As bloggers, we often think about photographing food for blog posts, and sometimes even about writing cookbooks. But we often forget to focus on how photographing a cookbook can be a completely different experience than photographing for a blog. Whether you're photographing your own book or being paid to photograph one for a publisher, today's guest is the perfect person to help us out. She helps food makers, growers, and artisans style and shoot their own photos aligned with their brands. She creates content for major food brands, ag organizations, and publishers. She's the author-photographer of two cookbooks, Beer Bread and Food on Tap. They're both great books. And her latest course, Cookbook Photo Academy, helps food lovers navigate photographing their own cookbooks while they're also writing them. She's also a good friend of mine, and she was actually the first guest I ever had on this podcast almost a year ago to the day. We're about a week off. So I can't wait to have her back on and learn from today's guest, Lori Rice, photographer and writer, founder of Fake Food Free Productions and Creating You courses. Lori, welcome to Makin Bacon.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be back. And I didn't know it was almost a year to the day.
I was like, I wonder how long I've been doing this. I should look up Lori's last episode. And I think it was December 15th. So I start every episode off the same. So I've already asked you this question, but I feel like a little bit might have changed over the last year from the last time you were on. Mm-hmm. So to get started, tell us, what is it generally like around your dinner table on a typical day?
It's very similar to it was before, but actually, depending on whether if you think sitting around the table together is a good thing, then I've gotten even worse. So typically, it's just my husband and I. So usually, it's in front of the TV, unless it's a special dinner, then we might be around the table. But for the most part, at the TV right now, I think everyone's really in a crazy time, and we are also preparing for a move soon. So it's a little, sometimes, occasionally it's standing at the counter right now. So I am not the model of family dinners by any means.
I like that. It's you might be efficient when it comes to your cookbooks, but to scheduling dinner table time, it might not be.
Doesn't happen.
I think we all have a lot going on these days, regardless.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So before we dive into cookbooks, I wanted to talk some about natural versus artificial lighting. It's a huge topic people worry about and stress over, and a lot of people feel very passionately. We had a question here from Marissa Moore who said, looking forward to the conversation, but my question is, would you recommend artificial lighting to guarantee consistency? Or is there a way to shoot the 100+ recipes you need using natural light successfully?
Okay, yeah. So I saw Marissa's question and I actually made some notes because there are several things that I wanted to go over with this. So first of all, I just want to share that I am a 95% natural light photographer. And there's some reasons for that. I'll get into that in a second. But both of my books were shot with natural light. So I rarely use artificial light. It worked really, really well for me. And in my opinion, consistency can be achieved in many different ways when it comes to the photos in your cookbook. And I actually think that lighting and different types of lighting can be a way to reduce monotony. So there are ways to create consistency with lighting. Each recipe is going to have a mood. You've got morning, you've got evening. So I wouldn't worry too much about that kind of consistency when it comes to your lighting. So most definitely, obviously, if I shot my cookbooks in natural light, I think you can definitely shoot them with natural light. But you're probably still asking yourself a few questions like, how do I make this decision? So I want you to ask yourself these three things to help decide how you want to shoot your book. So first of all, I really want you to think about what inspires you most when it comes to your photography and what makes you feel the most creative. So for me, that is shooting in natural light and shooting handheld. Those are my two favorite things. Those are when the ideas come to me, when I can move and create really, like, in my opinion, interesting photos that spark that creative juice that I can just keep going. And the reason I say keep going is because you are going to experience creative exhaustion when you are writing and photographing your book. There's no way around it. I've got a lot of tips for how to help with that, but you will experience it. So anything you can do to keep that creativity up, that inspiration up, is going to help you. So if you're forcing yourself to do something, for me, using artificial light, which I really don't like to do, it's going to make the process even harder and more difficult. Creativity is going to be more challenging. So I would say go with what you love. And if you love both, use a mix of both.
I love that point of like how long the cookbook process is. It's like, it's the happiest day when you're finally done with it, both because you've created something, but also because you no longer have to work with it. I got an email from someone that's in my course, and she, Randy Teasdale from Bohemian Vegan Kitchen, who has an amazing book coming out. I just got to see kind of her first proof of it, and the photography and stuff is great in it. And like part of the email is like, I am almost at the finish line. Like, I just want to crawl across it and finally be done with this process. And it's so true that you need to focus on what you love doing, because otherwise you will just be like, I don't want to take photos today, or I don't want to write recipes today. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's both a happy and slightly stressful process.
Yep.
So the second thing is to think about whether or not you've conquered learning one over the other. So if you don't use natural light now and you haven't perfected it, however you want to put it, or it could be natural light, vice versa. Don't try to learn something new right before you jump into your book. Go with what you're comfortable with for now. If you're happy with your photos now, they're going to be fine. You'll find a way to work with what you have as far as light goes.
Don't start experimenting with the thing that's going to be in a printed format that is almost impossible to change moving forward. Save that for your blog, where you can go back and update your old posts down the road when you've got a little bit better.
Exactly. And don't add anything else to your plate. You're going to have you're probably going to have a lot of new recipes, content, photo styles and things like that. Don't make yourself learn a new style of photography in the process. And then the third thing is just to think about what your schedule is. So if you have so there's different ways that you can develop a capture plan, which is what I teach in my course, how you're going to develop your recipes, how you're going to test them, then how you're going to photograph. Now, for me, I used a lot of combination of things with that. So I'd work on recipes a little bit, and I really enjoyed working on, especially for beer bread, like baking early in the morning or in the evenings. It was kind of more of a relaxing process for me. And then I would save my daylight hours for photographing the food. So natural light was not an issue for me, but depending on, if you only have, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. to do all the work period, you might want to think about that, and you might need to shoot in the evenings and need to use artificial light. So think about what schedule you're going to have going into it. For me, it was very flexible.
That makes sense. That it's like, for me, I've never really shot in natural light. I do everything artificial. And the main reasons are, I have one door in our apartment, which you can see the nice light coming in right there, which my wife wouldn't appreciate too much if I set up a table in front of it to get, some good angles on it. And then most of the food I photograph now I'm cooking it for dinner, especially over the last year. So it's, this time of year, unless we're eating at 4, which is the middle of the workday, Right. I can't get natural light at all unless I save it for the next day. So it's something that I've had to do. But, especially if you're setting aside days, which you generally have to for a cookbook to really do the photography, you can make sure that you plan around the light. You'll be ready when it's ready.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that was basically that's what I'd come back to ask yourself to decide what's best for you if you're trying to make that decision. But to answer her question, yes, you can definitely shoot 100+ recipes in natural light.
Nice. And I think it's good that you mentioned too that like you can do a mix. You don't have to just pick one and stick with that all the time. And I do notice that I am a decent food photographer now. I feel like I've got myself to that level. But like that's a far away from someone like you, Lori, that's like a really, really good food photographer. And a lot of the people listening are amazing food photographers. So I know how to do a few small things that turn out pretty good looking food, but I'll like look on Instagram sometimes and all my food looks almost the same. Like it's different proteins and different sides and different colors, but it's like same kind of diagonal look, and the lighting's the same because I use artificial lighting. And I can see what you mean by like if I varied my lighting, it would vary the feel of the food so much, even without me having to learn how to plate in a different style necessarily. Because like you said, a little bit darker, bluer light, it would come out more moody. A little bit brighter, it'd be more vibrant, and the plate itself could look almost the same still.
Yeah. And with a cookbook, you're especially if it's a bit of a passion project for a lot of people, you know, you're putting your stories in there, and each recipe kind of has that story behind it. And so it's okay for the photographs to kind of reflect what you're trying to represent, what that recipe represents to you and what you're trying to help it represent to other people.
Yes. It's amazing looking at your photos for your first book versus the photos in my first book. They were, mine were, I was not yet a decent food photographer when I put out my first 3 or 4 books. It was about my 5th one. I just started to barely enter like decent, you know, not the rando on Instagram kind of, you're like, what is on that plate? That was my first 3 cookbooks, which was a little embarrassing looking back now, but people didn't mind. And that wasn't I wasn't known for my photography, so it was okay.
Right. And I had been shooting for a while before I did my book. So, you know, and the thing is too, when it comes to when we get to be a little bit too critical of ourselves, we always all are all the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many projects I do that I'm just like, I just don't like that. And my client loves it. So you just have to, everybody's a little bit different, you know, and when you're writing a cookbook, even if you're working with a traditional publishing company, ultimately it's your book, you have to promote it. So you just need to please yourself.
Yeah. That's one thing that I started trying to, I've been doing a lot of improv, and I don't feel comfortable ever with anything that I do making up on stage because I don't have an acting background or any of that. And it's one thing that I started to like internalize and I use for food photography and food writing now is that there's people that I respect and that are honest with me about stuff. And if they tell me that it's good, then I try to turn off the voice in my head that's telling me it's not good enough or I can do better or I fell short. I'm like, no, if Lori looks at one of my photos and says, no, this is a good photo, then I should stop caring about what I think because I trust Lori and her opinion and she would tell me if it's garbage. So it's, that's helped me get through a little bit of that self-criticalness.
Oh, yeah, that's a great tip for sure.
So I know shooting a book is not the same thing as shooting for a blog, especially when you're doing a beautiful cookbook. What mistakes do you see bloggers make when they try to dive into a cookbook for the first time?
Well, the number one is going to be making sure that your photos are fit for print. And this has become an extremely debatable topic over time. Now that iPhones do have the capability of shooting RAW, and everyone has different cameras, mirrorless cameras are capable of really high quality images. No, you definitely do not have to use a DSLR camera. So, because when you're shooting for your blog, the screen is very forgiving. The screen interprets different colors than print photos interprets. So there's all these factors going on. Is the image high enough quality for print? Whereas you can use a lot of images on the web that will not look good when they're printed. Is the photo tack sharp? So that all goes into the photos, shooting that's fit for print. Now, going back to the idea that you can use different tools, but it stands when it comes to, you might be able to get away with more in that sense if you're self-publishing. But if you are presenting yourself to a traditional publisher to photograph your cookbook, do not tell them that you're going to shoot with your phone. They won't. 95% of them will not assign you that project.
Unless your name is Alton Brown, you're not going to be allowed to do that, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. As you know, it's been done. People will do it. But if you've ever blown up your own image and on a phone and kind of seen the differences in the pixelation and things like that. And we've kind of been misled because there's so many printing companies that you can send iPhone photos to and get them printed for your wall, and they're gorgeous and all of that. There's a lot of stuff that goes in on the back end with that. So make sure that you understand what a publisher might need from you in the terms of the photos, and that you're able to deliver that. So that's the jump between a blog and shooting for print. Mm-hmm. If your publisher is like, hey, shoot with your iPhone, well, nobody's going to argue with that. Do what they want you to do, but most of them are not going to tell you. You'll need to present yourself with some level of knowledge for print photography to be assigned to photograph your book when working with a publisher.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I was also surprised how different things look in print than they do on the screen. Never having, been printed out my photos. Generally, my wife took a photography class, and one of their projects at the end was to assemble their top 8 or 10 photos in a little gallery display type thing. And so we went through all of her online ones and narrowed it down, and we're like, okay, these are the top 10 for sure. And here's another 20 or 30 that we're going to print out because it's 50 cents and we want to look at it. And none of our top 10 ended up in the display because when we printed them out, they had different feels. They looked different. They were different photos in print, and the display was going to be in print. And so our top 10, not a single one of the ones that we thought were going to be on the display were actually in it because they just felt so different.
Yeah. And you have to be kind of open to that too, in the sense of if you're sending your images off to a publisher or a printer. For example, in my books, my images kind of have a filter over them, and the design team did that. So they have more of that contrasty curve look than what I delivered to them, which was totally fine with me because I trusted them. I think it looks great, but that's not how the image looked whenever I presented that to them. And I kind of figured that out. Once you publish a book, you're going to have people that are asking to share things and images. And I had some of my images, and then I had images that the publisher had helped share to outlets. And I was like, you don't think about it when you see the book. I'm like, those don't look the same. So you need to kind of be open to that and thinking that some of those corrections may be made. And I'm kind of experiencing that with my own work now. One of my goals in this quarter and throughout next year is to print more of my work myself. So, things from small square photos to larger photos, and I'm kind of understanding how they look on different papers, and from, the digital file, what it looks like. I love creative things and the way things change. So I'm happy with it. But, if you're married to exactly how a photo looks, it's also good to understand that when it's printed, those colors and all that may not look as sharp or bright or saturated.
And I don't know how it works with traditional publishers, but with print on demand, there's a lot of different paper types. There's a lot of different, inks. And what you can do, I know Tracy from the Institute of Culinary Education is doing this for her book, is she's setting it up on Ingram and setting it up on Amazon KDP, and I think doing BookBaby, and she's ordering a proof copy from each one and having it mailed to her on the different papers and the different things. And she can actually look at, how does this paper affect my specific photography style? And, you get a lot better feel, and you can look at them side by side to make the decision. Is it worth paying more for this type of, quality, or is it good enough at this level? If I get $3 more per book sold, you can start making those decisions for your book itself, not just theoretically.
Yeah, that is a great idea. And it also kind of shares that freedom that you have with self-publishing, that you really can, do all these things and get it to look exactly the way you want it to look, that there are a lot of options out there.
Yep. All right, so the one of the mistakes they make is assuming that it's going to be the same image can be used in everything all the time. Mm-hmm. What else do food bloggers mistakes they make?
Two more things. The first of those would be that shooting 75 recipes for a book is the same as shooting, that same amount for your blog. And then also that going back to that consistency and monotony thing, that kind of feeds into it being the same. They think feeling that it's the same, those images that you're putting on your blog, when they're put into a book, if they're all very similar, how we consume books is very different from how we consume web content. So, you want that consistency, but not monotony in your photos. And it's kind of, that is debatable because, I'm sure that you've seen some books that all the photos look almost exactly the same. We have Instagram accounts that are like that. But, when it comes to a book, you want the image to speak to the person as the recipe is, and the variation really makes it pleasing to the eye. With thinking that it's the same as far as time, even if you batch your work as a blogger and you do multiple recipes at a time and you schedule them and all of that kind of stuff, I still can't express how much different it is to have an entire book, to write the recipes and the head notes and the intro chapters and your acknowledgements, and then, whether you're working with yourself or you've contracted with a designer to help and you're working with that. It's a very different experience, and it can be really exhausting if you don't plan out your time, plan creative breaks, those kinds of things. So, and that goes to say, if it's a single subject book, it's even worse.
I feel like it's like so much harder too, because you want the quality to be even better. Like I've said, I'm not known for my photography, so I can get away with a lot on my blog that it's like, I'll shoot a video of something and I can take screen captures of that to show like step by step for something. And it's good enough because it's highlighting what it is, and, people are fine with it. But I don't want to put those things in my books these days, because my photography is good enough that like the hero shots and the finalized dishes are good enough that I don't want to put in these kind of mediocre images, because it makes my book look not nearly the quality that it is, where I just don't hesitate at all to put those on my blog, because it's just providing information and it's helpful. And so I found myself like shooting a dish and be like, well, I got this, I'm all set. And then I go back and look through it. I'm like, none of these are good enough for the book. Like, I'm just going to put it on my website and I'll come up with something else for the book. But I just wanted everything to just be that much better, because people are paying money for it and it's going to live forever in this printed form.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just that it's permanent, I think, is a thought to have about it, because even though our content lives online forever, or however you want to put it, you can always go back in and update those photos and change that a little bit. Or if you decide later in a book, you're not going to be doing that for the most part. There are reprintings and things like that, but large changes like that typically don't happen with photography and everything. So, and it's the best feeling when someone tells you, oh, I love this book. These recipes are so great. The photos are so beautiful. It's a really, really great feeling. And that's one of the drives. Like, you're writing this book for yourself, but I think most of us are writing it because we want people to feel that way. Not about us, but we want them to have recipes they love and photos that make them smile or inspire them. And so with a book, you can't get too caught up in perfectionism to where it stalls you, but you do want to bring your best foot forward so that it's something that you're really proud to share and that it represents you for years to come.
Yep. And you have a lot more information about photographing cookbooks in your Cookbook Photo Academy course at loririce.com. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into that? We're going to cover a lot more in this episode, but I want to give you a chance to plug your amazing course.
Yeah, definitely. So we go over, those differences with how books are consumed versus blogs and digital content. And then we talk about very specific, camera details and things like that when it comes to shooting for print. And then we also go into what are those key markers of consistency in a photo, and what are those things with monotony that we want to avoid. So we go really deep with those types of things. And then we nail down your capture plan. So you get examples of different ways that you could structure this work so that you can jump in and, really maximize your time, make sure you have those creative breaks, and you choose and work yourself through the process that's going to be best for you, so that you come out of this. I know so many people that have written and photographed their books and they hated it. And I don't ever want anyone to feel that way. You might feel that right after you submit it, but after you give yourself a little bit of time, I want you to love it and I want you to do it again. And this course is designed to help you to want to do that. As you mentioned at the beginning, it's to help those who want to photograph their own cookbooks to navigate the process while they're also writing it, because you don't have to photograph your own cookbook, whether you're self-publishing or you're working with a traditional publisher. But there are so many people out there like me that it's a package deal. I didn't want to write a cookbook if I didn't photograph it, because that's the part I love, is the photography, and it's part of me. And it really goes together for me. And so with the course, we work through the capture plan, and then I have a couple extra modules in there. And one is positioning yourself as the photographer for your book. And that's for those who may choose to work with a traditional publisher. So we talk a bit about what you need to put in your proposal to make sure that you can show them that you are the person to photograph this book. And then one of my favorite parts of the course, the last module, I call it Cookbook Photo Chronicles. And Jason is a part of this, but I've done interviews with 8 people now. And we have, I go through their best tips and with their 15-minute interviews, easy to absorb quickly. And I will continue to update those. When you're in the course, you get lifetime updates of the course. So I will continue to add these interviews with self-publishers and those who have worked with traditional publishers, food photographer, food stylist, art director, and a literary agent. And so they're sharing their tips from their perspective about photographing your own cookbook. And then I also, one thing that I don't think is touched on enough is collaborative efforts and working together, and how to conflict resolution. And I actually have a guest training from a leadership and business coach who I know and like very much. And she does a mini training on how to, set those priorities of what you are going to hold firm on and what you're going to be flexible on when it comes to like your book and changing the covers and the photos and things like that. So
I love that. I've talked to you a lot about photographing cookbooks, and I always learn something every time that I talk to you. And, I've been in your course. It's an amazing course. And the amount of content you have is just, if you're interested in putting out a beautiful cookbook, you need to check out Lori's course, and then you can go check out mine for how to get it printed. But Lori's course is great for the photography aspects of it. Yeah. One of the biggest things that I ran into was, especially on my infusions book, I had to shoot like 20 dishes in the last week because I was so far behind on photography. I wanted it out by Thanksgiving when sales really start ramping up, and I had to just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot for an entire week. How do you avoid getting so far behind on your photography schedule that you can kind of hit deadlines that you need to hit?
I think looking at knowing everything that you're going to have to do is the first step. So really understanding that, you might be using recipes from your blog that are already developed and tested, or you might be, creating new recipes that need testing. And then you're going to have the writing portion, because whether you're self-publishing or working with a traditional publisher, your deadline is everything. So when you're doing all the jobs, everything has to be done. So there's no like, well, I'll submit the recipes and then I'll get the photos done and things like that. It's all at one time. So really taking a bigger picture of a calendar and figuring out, with, like I mentioned, with your capture plan, figuring out how you want to do this. Do you want to develop recipes for 2 weeks and then take a week and shoot photos? Or like I did, where I would test recipes for a while and then I take photos, because I get really bored and burn out when I do one thing, which is why everyone tells you to focus, but it's why I will always be a writer and photographer, because when I get bored with one, I move on to the other. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that. So that's how I developed my cookbooks. So looking at a larger picture of your full timeline between now and your deadline, and then working in extra days for makeup time is an important one. And then also extra like buffer days and creative break days and different things like that. You want to plan in time that, a lot of this is just developing ideas and thinking about your styling and how you want the photos to look. Let yourself have time to do that, have days to do that. Because then if you go into it with a clear plan, you will get behind less because you're going to like mess up less photos. You're going to have fewer mistakes. You're going to nail what you want from the start. That can really help to keep you on schedule. But I do want to say, regardless of that, you're going to have mishaps and mix-ups and things like that. You're going to have last minute stuff depending on who you're working with. So just give yourself some days that nothing's on the calendar, and those will be makeup days so that you don't get so stressed out.
Everything will take longer than you think, and things happen in life that will throw you off. So I love that idea of planning it all and making sure that you plan in those buffer days and days, like you said, to maintain your creativity. Because I know the last pictures I was taking for that book were not my best work, because I was just like, I need a photograph for this. And I wasn't going in saying like, how can I explore this? How can I, expand or do more interesting things? And it shows in the book, which is unfortunate.
And I think to be honest with ourselves, that kind of happens to everybody. Definitely with my first book, there's some images in there, but I'm just like, I don't, they're fine, but
they're still better than anything I take,
But I still think I'm like, I should have taken more time, because I think whenever you do your first cookbook, one of the things that pleasantly overwhelms you is that you're like, I get to do all this. Like I get to, like, you sit back, you're like, I get to write this the way I want to write it. I get to take these photos the way that I want to take them. And I've said this before, that my experience working with a publisher was about as close as one could get to a self-publishing experience. They let me go. I got to do anything and everything that I wanted. Of course, there was feedback and there were thoughts and there were suggestions, but they really trusted me as the author and photographer, which is a wonderful position to be in if you're working with a publishing company. But I just had this overwhelming feeling that I get to do all this. So so whenever you do that, and then like you have something in there, you're like, oh, I should have put in the time to maybe do an extra one. But you got to find that balance, because it's not, not everything's going to be perfect. There's always going to be one least favorite photo in there.
Yeah, by definition, right? Something.
Yeah,
I like it all equally. It's
right.
Yeah, it's definitely a long process that a lot goes into it, but it's super enjoyable. And the one thing that I would say is, when we talk, especially about you, like a lot of your course can help anybody that wants to photograph a cookbook of any kind, but it's also really going to help someone that is a serious photographer that loves their photography and really wants to maximize the quality. And I'm sure there's people out there that are listening that aren't good photographers, and well, they could get something for your course still. I know, like I said, I learn a lot all the time. I don't want them to feel intimidated. Like I said, my first few books, weren't the best photography, especially if you're self-publishing. Traditional publishing, you can run into, you have to have a certain level of quality. But if you're self-publishing, don't stress out too much, because the majority of people that are going to buy your book are the people that follow you on your blog, who have been seeing your photography for the last year or two, know what your style is, and they know what they're going to be getting from it. They don't expect you to make this huge jump suddenly and be like, well, where's all the glossy, amazing photos? These are the same mediocre photos on your blog. They know what they're getting, so it's all right. So don't doubt yourself if you're out there, and don't let that hold you back.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, we all have something unique to bring. And like you said, the audience that you built and the people that follow you and like you, they like you for those specific reasons, and they associate that with you. So your book's going to reflect that, which is what's going to be appealing to them and why they're going to buy it. And I think that I think this idea that that needs to be different, or this huge project, or your very first one's going to be on this pedestal. A lot of people, it's a stepping stone. They do their first book so that they can then do their second book, and so don't be afraid to kind of take that on as well, and consider this a long-term goal if it's something you want to do. And as you mentioned, with the level of photography, a course like Cookbook Photo Academy, it's preparing you for what to expect and to step into the process prepared. So even if you aren't where you're at, where you want to be with your photography, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be educated on how to photograph your own cookbook when you're ready for that. So, and the other supporting things that I help with are getting you to that point where, my weekly emails and things like that, sharing those tips, helping you to find your creative voice when it comes to your photography and finding, what works for you and building your skills.
Help maximize your photography regardless of what level you're at, which I think is very valuable. So if you're talking to a publisher, when do you kind of pitch that you can do your own photography? Like, how do you bring that up with them during the discussions around publication?
Well, you want to if you're approached by a publisher, I guess, and you don't have an agent in the mix, when they approach you, I would first of all ask them if it's in your heart that you want to photograph your book and you want to do that. The first conversation, I would say, my photography is very closely aligned with my recipes and I want to photograph my own book. Are you willing to consider that? That would be first part of my conversation for someone like me, because it was such a part of the deal. If you're on the fence, still, regardless, I would still ask that question to begin with. If I should decide that I want to do it, would you accept that? Because some publishing companies publishers may say no right away, so you'll know. And then you can make the decision, well, I was kind of on the fence anyway, because it is a lot of work. Then you can start to make your decision. So for me, it would be right away.
And I assume if you photograph your own book, you get compensated by the publisher for providing the photography. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. And, advances are going to be different from every publisher. Larger publishing companies will probably, you'll have your advance as the writer, and then you'll have your advance as the photographer. For me, mine were both combined because I presented myself with that. Photography, it works in both ways. Doing your own photographs for a book with a publisher, it saves them money. But in some instances, the author can also make more money, because a lot of times when someone gets a very large advance for a book and they're hiring out the photographer, the author is the one who is working with the publisher, but they're the money for the photographer is coming out of their advance. So they're paying that money. It's not always separate. Like I said, different every time. So if you can photograph and write, the publisher often will pay a little bit less for that, because you're not going to have studio fees and a stylist and, all that kind of thing. But you also keep more of that money because you're doing that job. So it's every single offer and deal needs to be, scrutinized and thought about to see what that process is. And I know you talk about that a lot, figuring out if whether it's a good deal or not, takes some time.
Yeah. Need to know what your goals are too for going into it. Right. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that love photography and don't necessarily view themselves as great recipe writers. How can someone that's a photographer find maybe bloggers to work with that don't have the photography skills and work with them, or go to a publisher and get some of these deals to shoot a cookbook that might not be your own cookbook, but it's one that needs photographed?
So that's an interesting process. And it's one that I've only been moderately successful at. Let's put it that way. Some photographers, more full-time photographers, sometimes they work with agencies who will help you find that. So if you're at a level where you start to work with an agency, that can be one way. You can approach publishers yourself with your skill level. Do they accept, photographers, freelance photographers for their work? How does that work? Could you be put on their list? Never be afraid to, send that very honest email that you're here, this is your work, and you would love to find new opportunities. So you can, email editors and publishing companies directly. I have published other cookbooks or other publishers. They found me because of my blog, actually. They had followed me for years, and then they were writing a book internally by one of their editors, and they needed, like half the photos, photographed. And then, so I worked with that as a remote shoot. And then one thing that you might also want to explore is if you work with ag agencies and food brands, and so you have clients essentially like I do. So you're doing recipe or photography work for them. a lot of times they'll have internal cookbooks. In fact, those can be some of the ones that are the most fun to work on, where, if you have a food brand or agency that's doing an internal cookbook, and you could photograph that for them. So I've done that. One of my main clients is California Figs. I work a lot with them. Of their cookbook that came out last year. And then I was also the contributing photographer. They wanted to use some old photos too, but I photographed about 75% new for the book. So there's opportunities like that. You don't just have to think in terms of, a publisher, a cookbook, or self-published. Offer that help to someone else who's already putting in the work on the other way. Now, if you mentioned, if you're a photographer and you want, a blogger is developing the recipes, recipe developer, it's networking, get out there. I mean, it didn't end up working out, but I have friends who had blogs, who had cookbook deals, and I was submitted into the mix that they offered the publisher. I didn't end up getting those, but they were like, I'd love Lori to shoot my book, and then they offered that. So, networking, getting to know people. If your strength's photography, start talking to someone who, doesn't have that strength or doesn't want to photograph their book, and see where that can go.
Go to a blogger conference and ask everyone you meet, what's your least favorite part of putting out a blog post? And the ones that say taking photographs, say, hey, we should talk.
Start hanging out with them. Yeah.
And I know you do that for some people right now, right? That you take pictures that go on their blogs because they don't want to do the photography, and you do enough writing as it is. So it gives you a little bit of a creative outlet with not having to kind of come up with your own content. Right.
And it's actually it's one of the best projects that I have, because when you find someone that really is, flexible and loves your work and really wants you to be creative, then, I do that work for them and they're super happy with it, and I get to be creative. It's a great relationship.
Nice. And sometimes it's great, I think, creating anything with constraints around it. So being told, like, here's what I need, and then being creative within those constraints, I feel like often pushes people in new directions, and you can kind of explore new areas that you wouldn't otherwise.
Definitely. Yeah.
How did you get started doing brand work? I know we talked about this a little bit. If people are really interested in brand work, the first interview with Lori on Makin Bacon, I think it's episode 5 that came out. We go into a lot more about clients, but I wanted to go into just a little bit of how you did get started with brand work.
So brand work was 100% networking for me. It's why when people ask me the question, how do I pitch people? I have not had as much success getting brand work by pitching. And that's because a lot of other people are pitching. And depending on how you value your work and where you price yourself, there's always going to be someone else out there that's cheaper. So when people get to know you, and we do that, and I mean, we keep saying that in times like these, it's harder to network in person, but there are a lot of opportunities now online to network. And so what I mean by that is I went to one suggestion that I would have, while I'm a huge fan of blogger conferences, if you're a blogger, go to something else, something related to food. It can be in agriculture, the food that you're interested in. It can be, a culinary organization, or a restaurant organization, or, food photography is fine too, prop styling, whatever the case may be. And, get to know people that aren't looking to do the exact same thing that you're trying to do. Because when keep ourselves in environments where we're all trying to get a piece of that particular pie, it only ends up being frustrating. And my belief is that we're colleagues and we're not competitors. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, especially in the blogging world, but that's one of the reasons I don't blog anymore is because I want colleagues, not competitors. So, but that's not to say that I'm, ignorant to the fact that I am in competition with anyone else that is bidding a job or anything like that. So by just conversations with meeting people, I got my first project with a large citrus company here in California, Wonderful Citrus. If you've ever seen Cuties, that's their product. And I ran a blog for them for about 3 years where I developed recipes and fun citrus ideas, and I photographed it and everything. So that was really my first brand job. Prior to that, I'm a nutritionist by education. So I had developed for recipes and photos for a health website, and I'd also done some magazine writing. I started in health writing and transitioned to food writing. So that was my first brand job that landed more brand work, because they also own pomegranates and some other things. And then I went to, actually, Jason, this is where we met, at the Produce PMA, Produce Marketing Association. And I met the Onion Association there. I had just written an article about onions, so I knew all the ins and outs of how they grew because I focus on agriculture with a lot of my work. And that piqued her interest because we had a lot of conversation, and I worked with her for about 3 or 4 years after that, photographing. So those opportunities are there. And my advice would be to not try so hard. Let it happen. Go to those when we can, go to those dinners, go to those networking events, even if they're online, and just have conversations with people that share your interests in food. And it can really lead to things when you're yourself, I think.
Yeah, if you go in, I feel like without trying to get something, especially during networking, it's a lot easier. And for me, I am not good at sales and trying to pitch myself to people in person. But if I'm just going to have a conversation with someone, that works fine, and I'm not nervous. And so it's been a lot easier for me if I'm like, I'd love to work with any of these brands, but I'm just going to go meet people and say hi. And I feel like that's removes a lot of the pressure, and you aren't like waiting, when should I slip in the pitch, or you're just trying to get to know them, and you can send a follow-up email down the road, which is they're going to read it because they know you at that point. And I know I had Chef Debbie Dubbs on a few episodes ago, and she does a lot of demos for brands, and the way that she approaches jobs is similar to you, that if she ever sees anyone demoing anything that she has any interest in, she goes up and talks to that person. She's not pitching them because she wants their job, but she gets to know the person doing it, and they're often introduce them because they have more than one person demoing a lot of the time. And she gets a lot of jobs from when that person leaves to go demo somewhere else. And they say, oh, I know Chef Debbie, you should talk to her. And here's her contact info. And she says, I get out there, I meet everyone that I can meet. And through that, I start to learn who I should talk to. And I get intro emails from people, already working with this person. And it opens up a lot of doors.
Right. It really is wild how one thing leads to another with that. And people are leaving jobs and going to jobs all the time that you don't see as happening. I mean, with the citrus job, an outside consultant that they had with that then went to outside consult for California Olive Ranch, which led to my work with them because she knew of me. And then onions led to US Apple, which has led to mushrooms. And so it's, people leave and you don't know the roles of the people you're meeting. They might change their, especially PR and marketing things, they change roles a lot and they move around a lot. So, just getting to know people in those areas you want to work can help. And we're talking years to come. This was when I first moved to California with that citrus job, and we're, 7 years in, and I still work with places that have unfolded because of that one original connection.
And it can be like, I'm an introvert, which people probably don't know because all they see me is talking constantly, either on stage or to people that I'm interviewing. But it's taken me a long time to get used to talking to people, and it pays off. It's uncomfortable at first, but you get more used to it the more you're doing it. And you find these like serendipitous moments that I was speaking at a conference, and so I got to go to like the breakfast they had, and I sat down and was talking to the woman next to me, and we were just chatting, and we got onto sous vide because that's what I blog about, and she's interested in that. So we were talking about, I do a conference, and she was like, oh, well, that's really cool that you do the conference, and started to talk, and they started like introducing people at the breakfast. So we stopped talking. They're like, oh yeah. And, the original founder of the, IFBC conference, Sherry, and she like stands up from next to me. It's like, oh yeah, thanks everyone. I was like, okay, I did not realize I was speaking to the original founder, and we had like a good connection. I wasn't trying to do anything. And through that, she like came on the board of our conference because she likes conferences, gave us introductions to some huge speakers. And it was all just because I struck up a conversation with the person sitting next to me, which if you go to any conference whatsoever, everyone is probably sitting there going like, should I talk to the person next to me? Should I not? And like, if you're the one that just says hi, like it it starts most conversations. Most people are there to have fun and meet people. They just are scared like you are. So get out there and kind of open your mouth. Nothing bad will happen most of the time.
Exactly. I mean, I think the whole introvert thing, like we have a lot of confusion in our society about that, in the sense that introvert doesn't mean you can't talk to anyone, like to one single person. That's introvert means that's where you pull your energy from. And I'm an introvert too, just like you. No one would think that because I talk on stage, I do it, but I love being alone and I pull my energy and I re-energize when I'm alone. That would probably be my preferred place most of the time. So even if you feel like you're an introvert, just having that table conversation like you had and showing a true interest in what do, and talking to someone and showing interest, it leads to then you talking about what you do and making those connections.
Yeah, I've been surprised how much doing a podcast has been helpful for just talking to people one-on-one, because I'm a lot better at listening and asking questions about what they just said. And if you treat it like an interview, it's not that hard to socialize with most human beings.
Right. We're all scared. Just picture us all scared sitting there, the same as you. And then
I know one of the things you're a big believer in is supporting makers and growers who are doing things to kind of move the food systems forward in a more sustainable manner, a more thoughtful manner. What are some brands out there that are doing some things that you've come across lately that you really appreciate?
Well, really, I really seek a lot of the smaller independent brands that are here in California. I'm extremely lucky because I'm part-time in the Central Valley, lived in the Bay Area, part-time in the Central Valley, where almost all of the agriculture is grown here in the U.S., or all the food is grown here in the U.S. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the fact that if something is really small, that if it's not really small, if it's large agriculture, that it's not a generation-owned business that's worth supporting. And that's totally untrue, because there are a lot of very large farms whose ancestors came over from Italy to farm, which I just wrote an article about, which that's the top of my head, and it really puts things into perspective. So for me, we have a farm here in Fresno that's Marchini Farms that grows kale for the country and radicchio for the country and things like that. And then I have small goat cheese farms on California Central Coast. I'm part-time on California Central Coast. And they're shipping out a lot of cheese across the West Coast, but they're a very small organization, up in the hill in Cambria in California. And I love working with them. But really for me, it's about, regardless of the size of the place or what they're producing, it's about what their mission is inside of that. And if their mission is to create a better system with those foods that we're consuming, and this goes to artisan goods for me too. I love handmade pottery, all of those kinds of things. I use a lot of that, handmade linens in my shots. And it's taken me a long time to get to that point where I value the investment and I save for the investment in those kind of things. But if you really want unique photography and photography that really reflects you, I think it's super important. So anyway, those are a couple of the places that, we have around here that I support. I mean, there's numerous small businesses around California. And I lived for 10 years in Central Kentucky, and they have a good thing going on with food as well.
Nice. Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, if anyone follows your Instagram account, I am sure they have seen the zebras. Where are the zebras near you in California? I feel like you're on safari every other week. I just get pictures of zebras and bison and just weird things that are not roaming, at least in Brooklyn.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm crazy about the zebras, and I feel alone in this a lot of times. But so Hearst, which if you have a magazine that has Hearst Corporation on the back of it, then you have heard of Hearst Corporation. So newspaper that started in San Francisco years ago, which is now a very huge media company. And William Randolph Hearst has a castle, which he built in San Simeon, California. 2 years ago, my husband and I made the best decision ever to purchase a small condo in San Simeon so we could spend half our time in both places in California. And so the backside of our condo opens up to a field. And one thing about William Randolph Hearst was that he was very eccentric and he had all kinds of wild animals. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but they were flown in. He had polar bears at one time and penguins, and it was really, really crazy. One of the things he had were zebras, and they have kept the zebras because they roam well with the cows. So, and Hearst is also a beef corporation. They have a winery as well. So Hearst Ranch beef roam with the zebras that still exist, and they keep having babies, and they're part of the ranch, and they're amazing. And I don't feel like anyone else that lives there is truly appreciates them as much as I do, because I'm up every morning to see if they're there, taking pictures. I bought a 100 to 400 lens, telephoto lens, so that I could photograph them. And yeah, I love it. It is like being on safari. And I also kind of love confusing people on my Instagram account. And every now and then you'll notice that I will do the story of where they came from, just so people catch up on it. Yeah.
I figured I had to ask because I see them all the time. And I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to solve the mystery of the zebras.
It's very cool. Yeah.
Well, Lori, I appreciate you coming on so much. If people listening want more information, they can go to loririce.com, check out your food photo or your Cookbook Photo Academy. And it's a great course. There's a lot of amazing things in it. And I appreciate you coming on and spending your afternoon away from the zebras and sharing some of your expertise with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been great to be here. You know that I love your work as well. And I'm so happy to speak to your audience. And if you want to reach out to me, I am happy to connect.
Lori's always good at answering emails and providing a lot of information. So if you have any questions, definitely reach out and she will hook you up, I am sure. So this has been Makin Bacon, all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Remember, you can join us live every Thursday when we record these episodes. You can ask the guest questions, talk to the other bloggers in the comments, and even see our smiling faces. So join us Thursdays at makethatbacon.com/live. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston. See you next Thursday.